Welcome, everyone, to the second Leadership Journey session of our July 2022 Global Leadership Lab immersion on the theme of leading movements. We have so many people from all over the world joining us on Zoom, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. My name is Michelle, and I am an Atlas Core Fellow from Mexico, serving at One to World. I am very excited to be today's session moderator and have the pleasure of speaking with our incredible guest. So, before we begin, we'd like to remind you that the Atlas Corp team will be monitoring chat on each of the platforms I already mentioned. So, make sure to ask our speaker great questions. We'll be back to the audience questions in the second half of today's event. And before we welcome her to warm up a little bit, here's an icebreaker question for everyone. So, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of leading movements? While you write your answers in the comment section, let me introduce today's guest. So, Hira Saeed is the founder and chief executive officer at CaterpillHERs, a digital platform and accelerator that helps women build and scale their businesses and careers. She also leads Pakistan leading tech community called Tech Geeks, which has over 15,000 members. Previously, as an Atlas Core Fellow herself, she has worked with Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship as a GSBI Fellow to help build their women's economic empowerment initiatives in Silicon Valley. Over the course of 5 years, Hira has mentored dozens of startups all over Pakistan to build their content, marketing, and branding strategy. She is currently an active mentor at Founder Institute and National Incubation Center. She also creates content on her social media, sharing tips about content, social media tips, and even copywriting. Hira has also worked as a facilitator for Startup Weekend in Pakistan, a 54-hour weekend event during which entrepreneurs pitch ideas for new startups, form teams around those business ideas to win the title. Lastly, Hira is an advocate for bringing more women into tech and businesses and has been developing programs and giving talk and workshops to accelerate the same mission. She has been a guest, panelist, and speaker at numerous conferences worldwide, of which one of the highlighted ones is her talk at Netflix headquarters, where she shared her views on women in leadership. So, thank you so much for joining us. Here is our very own Hira Saeed. Hira, welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle, and thank you to Atlas Corp for setting this out.
So I see that we are having so many great responses to the warm-up question. But before mentioning some of those, I would like to ask you the same question here. What about you? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of leading movements?
When you asked the question from the audience, that's what I was thinking as well. That if I'd be in the audience, so would I be typing it? I think for me, leading movements is kind of like a step ahead of just leading change, because one person can lead some sort of change as well. But when you're leading a movement, you're the leader and you have like an army of supporters, an army of change makers behind you. So when I think of leading movement, I think of a leader who has an army of supporter to bring about a change. So that's what I think when I think of leading movements.
Awesome. And I see some of the answers to the icebreaker. I see that people are even commenting public communications and fundraising. And I think that's so aligned what you said of having like an army of other change makers along with you, because these two areas are also areas that maybe people see like the backstage of many social movements or civil society organization, and many times these are like the machines, right, making it
Yeah,
work, the social
yeah.
movement. Yeah. So yeah, you were part of this fellowship. You were part of the Atlas Core fellowship. Now you're an alumni, And you founded Caterpillars nearly 3 years ago,
Yeah.
but it was soon right after graduating from the fellowship. And also at the same time, you successfully pursue a partnership with the organization that was your host organization in the fellowship. So can you just like tell us a little bit about that? Like how does that happen? How did you decided to make this a startup?
Yeah. Thank you for asking, Michelle. So I think for me, that whole experience wasn't kind of like a anything specific that I wanted to do. Oh, so when my fellowship would be ended, I'll just go to back to Pakistan and I'll start this organization and I'll do this in partnership with this company. There wasn't anything specific that I planned when I was there in the United States as a fellow. But I still remember that throughout that entire fellowship, the the amount of learning and challenges and the processes that I got exposed to,
Mm,
there was kind of like a fire in me that I was like, okay, so I've learned all of these things, but I have to figure out where am I applying those things, right? Because those that one whole year of experiences through Atlas Core, through Miller Center, through all the other amazing people that I met during the journey, I felt I was just bubbling with the ideas. I felt okay, so I've spent a year here in this fellowship. I've learned so much. What do I do next to apply all of these things in my life? And that's when Caterpillars was started. When I came back to Pakistan, I thought, okay, so and Atlas Core also asked us to like have an implementation project towards the end of the fellowship, and
mhm,
I pitched the idea of Caterpillars to in that in that whole pitch competition we had, and there was like a small fund behind it as well, and it got accepted, and from there it just didn't stop. I still can't believe that it was like 3 years ago when I only pitched it as an initiative that I want to run, and now it's like a full-fledged company, and we have 6 people, including me, working in the organization, and we're not stopping anytime soon, unless obviously something, God forbid, bad happens. So that's how it started. And with my host organization, the work that I had done with them when I was in the US, and the work that I was doing in Pakistan, I actually made sure that every single organization that I work with in the United States, including Atlas Core, including Miller Center, they know what I'm doing, and
mm,
I take them as a mentor for the work that I was doing. So I didn't do it in silo. The first thing I did when I launched CaterpillHERs in Pakistan, I wrote my first email to my host organization. I wrote my second email to Atlas Core that this is what I'm doing. And both of those organizations, I know that it's highlighted because Miller Center was my host organization, but it's still the support that Atlas Core gave me throughout these years. Even if it's just about like sharing what we're doing with hundreds of other fellows who come to Atlas every single year, that support has been such profound throughout this journey, and that's what Miller Center did to us as well. But on my end, the only thing I did is I put myself out there. I told them what I'm doing. I kept them up to date, and we had a beautiful partnership for almost a year and a half with Miller Center, running Caterpillars in Pakistan as their partner accelerator.
yeah. Congratulations also like for being so brave. Many of us that are still active as fellows, the new fellows that are coming to the program, we know that it's hard, as you said, like you face so many challenges when you move to another country, a new culture. So despite having all these challenges, you turn that into an opportunity, and now
Yeah.
it's your organization. So I think that's awesome. And so that brings me to a follow up question. So you have lived not only in the US, but you have lived and worked in the diverse cultural contexts. So when you first arrived in the US and you face all these challenges you mentioned, was there something in particular you were surprised to learn?
Yeah, I was surprised that they have such huge portion size in the restaurants. Like it's like how am I going to sustain my weight here, because they just serve so many food in one sitting. Anyway, I'm joking. So I think a particular challenge that I realized for my time in the United States was I had always worked in as a as a person who wanted to bring more women in technology, who wanted more women to start businesses, because I have done all of that, and I know if you grow up in a country like Pakistan or any developing country, it's just tough for women to break through the stuff that they go through. And I've always been advocate about this whole topic that there should be more women in technology and business. And I used to think of it as a very like developing world problem. Like, okay, so I think it only happens in my part of the world or maybe some other countries that are around my part of the world. And when I came to the US and I started working at my host organization where we were working about we were working on gender parity issues as well, I kind of like realized the universality of the problem, like how this problem is is so huge that it happens all over the world in different shapes and form, but it's not just the problem of one country, it's the global problem. It's something that we all need to talk about. It's something that we all need to fix. It's something that we all need to care about. And that was, I think, my realization of a challenge that I came for in the United States, and also kind of like tried to solve it as well. In terms of my personal challenge, I think Atlas Core is only one of the only few fellowships that at least I know of that brings together such diverse people from all over the world. Like when I've been into those rooms where when we were in Atlas, our GLLs were in person, so all of our together in one room. I've never been into any such rooms after Atlas Core, which was so powerful, which was so diverse, which was where the discussions that we used to have was not just the discussions about starting our new startups or building something for our own self. It was all the community first and world first. Every single person who I met at Atlas Core had a vision, had it figured out what they want to do and what type of change they want to bring in the world. That I feel personally, I felt that all the work that I have done in my life was just very small. There's so many brilliant people out there. And these were the two things I think that I personally realized and it was an eye opener thing for me during my entire fellowship time in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like this moment of realization, and also sometimes this like frustration of like not knowing exactly what we want to do is the aha moment, right? When you finally found like your passion and how you want to work towards that. So I think that's amazing. So I'm also curious, and we're all curious about how your specific background as a tech journalist influence your work. Many times when we hear, I don't know, like different professions or different backgrounds, we don't necessarily relate that to social impact. So how this specific background that you have lead you to like yeah, how this has influenced your work? Is there any insights or like any uh yeah, any learnings you had before coming to this journey that you apply to your work now as a social entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think the one of the one thing that was very similar with the work that I had done as a copywriter, as a tech journalist from Pakistan versus the work that I do right now is that entire time that I've spent in the working as a journalist and a copywriter and running the other company has allowed me to kind of like see things in a much more different light, I would say. Because when you're working, for example, on a story that has to be published in XYZ magazine, your job as a journalist to provide a very comprehensive, a very neutral, and a very factual view of the problem or a view of the story. And that's one of the most important quality that one can have as an entrepreneur as well, because the problem that you're trying to solve has to be a problem that can be solved with the work that you're doing, and also be very open to fail as well, be very open to, and also try to solve that problem with neutral eyes as well, without having any bias, with having like proper facts in place as well. So I think if you compare both of the work that I've done, if anything, that entire time in my life, I think I was just preparing myself to solve a bigger problem through the work that I was doing. And that has, I think, helped me a lot while working at Caterpillars as well. That my lens of looking at things, my lens of solving this problem is much more broad, I would say, and it's much more factually correct because I know the stats, because I know why this problem is real in so many parts of the world and why we need to solve it.
Yeah. And I earlier you mentioned also something that I feel like it's connected to also your background as a tech journalist. You were mentioning how you actually leverage and you actually make sure to share what you're doing with Atlas Core, with the host organization you had, with all of your network. You're sharing what you're doing. So in some sense, you're actually building your brand and making sure that brand it's out there, right, to solve that problem.
Yes,
So I think
absolutely.
that's yeah, so I think that's interesting. And also how you say that how this background also helped to tell the story of what you're solving and what your organization does.
Yes,
We have been
absolutely. Yeah,
talking,
yeah.
yeah, we
I
have been
think other
talking
than
about.
facts and everything else, one thing that it allowed me to do is to tell my story, is to put myself out there and actually share what we are trying to do. And also I think a lot of the times the people who are you're solving this problem for are people who are not even your target audience. They struggle to actually see why we are doing it and why we are only doing it for women or why we're not only doing for both genders. And it kind of like through that entire background of why the problem is important to be solved right now, it just kind of like helps me to put the story out there of why we work for women, why in a country like Pakistan startups or companies like Caterpillars should exist. It's not to make sure that there will be only women at the forefront, but it's to make sure that there will be both genders at the forefront. And right now there is not. So we are not pushing the agenda that there should only be women. We just wanna make the room look more diverse. We just want the industry to look more inclusive and more obviously diverse in terms of everything.
Yeah, and I was about to ask actually like why women. So you just answered that question. I think it's important, especially in like movements related to gender and to feminism and to women empowerment, to actually share why this is important. So thank you
Yeah,
again for explaining to all of our audience the why.
yeah.
Um, and like coming back a little also about like sharing this story and how this helps, do you feel like this has helped attract funding and supporters to your cause, and also what other strategies have you used to attract these funders and supporters?
Yeah, so to piggyback on the first question that you asked, I think when stories combined with data,
Mm,
I think that's where the answer most of the time is. So if somebody would ask me why women, I have hundreds of stories to share that why it is important for women in Pakistan and everywhere in the world to be financially independent, to learn a skill, to run their own businesses, to feel that they have an identity other than the identity that the world and society gave in. Then there are a lot of stories that I can quote about it. And then there is data. So data is independent. Data doesn't lie. I can just misquote those stories 100 times, but there's like thousands of researches that have been done that, and they prove the fact that there are not enough women in the industry, there are not enough women in the business world. And one can say that they didn't choose to be, but there's a lot of data that also support that if you give them the toolkit, if you give them the resources, if you build their confidence, they can do it. And I personally running Caterpillars for almost past two years, almost 2.5 years, is we have the data as well. So if it would be something that I would say that it won't work, we won't have women applying for the programs. We won't have
mm,
women applying for our career accelerator, our entrepreneurship accelerator. So to piggyback on our previous conversation, stories combined with data, I think is the answer to so many questions that people think of when they think of organizations like Caterpillars or any organization that is leading a movement specific to one gender or specific to one community in the world. And then Your next question, what was your next question?
Yeah, like apart from like telling the story, what others like strategies have you used to attract funding and supporters to your cause?
Yeah. So I'm going to give a very cliche advice on this question. And that cliche advice would be you miss 100% of the chances you don't take.
Mm,
And that's what I something that I wholeheartedly believe in. And I also keep telling this to people as well, that a lot of the time we just don't take the chances because we feel we're not ready enough, we feel we're not good enough, we feel there are better people out there who are a better fit for this, so nobody would pay a heed to our applications. And every time I catch myself thinking like this, I say the same thing to myself. Hira, I would miss this chance 100% if I won't take it. But if I take it, there is still 1% chance that I'm going to make it. So I go ahead and apply to accelerators. I go ahead and apply to incubators. I go ahead and apply to a lot of funding opportunities, no matter how small or big. It's not with just the focus of keep raising money for the company, but it also pushed me to think of the problem that I'm solving from very different lens. Each and every time I'm talking to different entrepreneur, different organization, accelerators, companies like Atlas Core, it just allows me to think of the work that I'm doing from a very different lens. So my suggestion or advice, if you ask me about fundraising and how you can support your cause, is to just show up. Your what you can do is to show up, do your job, apply for those programs, and just don't think about them. If you'll just start obsessing over that, you got rejected. I don't even remember how many times I got rejected from hundreds of applications that I've put through, and then maybe only one or two of them we won and we were able to sustain ourselves. So it's a very cliche advice, but it's a very life changing advice as well if you think it this way, that you miss 100% of the chances you don't take. So take chances as often as possible.
totally. So that leads me to our last question before we move to the questions from the audience. You already gave a great answer to this actually already. But if you were to give one single piece of advice to all the rising social change leaders watching us right now, what would it be? I know you just mentioned one advice of like take the chances, don't miss them. But if there's anything, other learnings you have had that you want
Yeah,
to
I
share.
my another cliche advice, but another very important advice would be to build as many collaborations or to do as many collaborations as possible within the room that you have an access to.
Mm,
So a lot of people think about when it comes to partnerships, when it comes to collaboration, they have to reach out to the companies that they admire. They have to reach out to the companies that are very far fetched from where they are right now. But if you think about it from this lens, that right now in this moment, I have an access to the room that I'm sitting. This room has leaders and change makers from 20 countries. How about I start from here? How about I create a one pager proposal and I just pitch it to all the 20 people who I have here, and then say how we can work together, how you can promote my work and how I can promote my work. Start from there. So whichever room you are in right now, try to build collaborations and partnerships from that room before you actually feel that you're prepared to go outside of it. That I think, especially with the fellowship like Atlas Core, and there will be so many rooms you'll be a part of. So it's not just one room. Every single week, through your host organization, through Atlas Core, through all the opportunities that we still keep getting from Atlas Core as well, through like sessions like these, just try to tap into people who know you, who appreciate your work, and form collaborations within the nearest possible room that you can get. That would be, I think, my last advice. That's something that I followed very closely. Instead of chasing something that I have 50% of chance of getting in, I've always chased something that maybe has like 80% of me getting in, because I think that's the nearest. That's something that I can do very easily. And yeah, that's my advice would be for all the other fellows who are listening to me right now as well. Do not take the other fellows that you have around you lightly in terms of how how successful they're gonna be in the next few years, which I'm 100% sure all of you would be.
Yeah, and thank you for that advice. I take it as well. And actually, some of the fellows and community of Atlas Corp and in the audience are already taking your advice, and they're willing to ask you great questions. So the first one comes from Miali from Madagascar. She says that you and her serve at the same organization. So she's really interested about knowing the challenges you have encountered as social entrepreneur.
Thank you so much, Mally, and I'm so glad that we could meet when I was in the Bay Area. All the best for the rest of your fellowship at Wheeler Center. It's literally one of the best places to work for, to accelerate your career in the social entrepreneurship.
So do you have like any challenges you have encountered apart from the ones you have already mentioned, as a social entrepreneur in general, that you want to like share with the audience?
I think yeah, it's a as an entrepreneur. If I would just wear the hat of an entrepreneur right now, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people would face if they start their own initiative would be to find a sustainable business model while running a social enterprise. Um, Not all of you can run nonprofits. Not all the countries are very nonprofits friendly. So if you start something that you're going to give at least 3 to 5 years of your life, the next 3 to 5 years of your life, scaling it, one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest questions you'll have to answer is how you're going to make money in the process. And if you want make money in the process, either through fundraising, either through any other business model, you will get burnout and the business would fail. So I think one of the most important questions that you have to answer as a social entrepreneur is how you can build a business while creating an impact as well. And both of those things are important. If you just keep making an impact and you don't have funds at all, you will burn out pretty soon and the company would end. So when you're running a traditional business, it's all caring about the profit. But when you're running a social enterprise, you care about the impact as much as you care about the profit. So basically, you're fighting two battles at the same time. So my advice, or the one challenge that I have personally encountered, that we're still trying to solve it through multiple other ways, and that I foresee a lot of people would come across as well, would be this. Yeah, I think that's what I would add to what I said earlier.
Yeah, thank you. So we're gonna move to the second question that it comes from Saddam, who's asking, how do you use online learning in your work with caterpillars? And what do you think is the future of online learning?
So we did not work on online education or slash career till this January or last December. Basically, Caterpillars was solely an entrepreneurship accelerator when we started it. But then to answer the same question that I was referring when you asked me about the challenge, one of the biggest challenge was how do we sustain ourselves? How do we make sure this all the work that we are doing can actually become a business? That's when I think we started tapping online learning with Caterpillar. So we started a career accelerator with an entrepreneurship accelerator for women in Pakistan and beyond Pakistan as well. And I've worked as a freelance full time freelancer as a journalist slash copywriter. I served in the corporate sector for a few years, and over those years, if there's one thing that has remained like constant, other than obviously the pivots that I've made in the career, was my passion to just deliver the knowledge that I have, is to just share what I've learned, is to talk to people, and I've built sort of like a community around it because of the same reason as well. And that I think is the future of online learning as well. People want to learn from people who have been there, who they feel they look like them, who have been through the same challenges. And that's what a lot of communities do. That's why communities like Atlas Core exist, because the one thing that is similar to all the fellows is they are working on impact first organization, or they are creating impact in one way or the form. So the future of online education or online learning, as I see, is the community building, is having those exclusive set of people around you who can teach you things from the lens that you've always craved for. Like for example, for me, if I'm learning how to be a good communicator, and if there would be somebody maybe from Atlas Core who I know has been in the similar type of rooms that I've been to, been through same type of challenges, he or she does not have like English as the first language, I would like to maybe learn a skill from that person, because I think our stories are same. I think we come from the same background. Then somebody who I feel would not be able to understand the challenges that I go through. That's I at least what I feel is the future of online learning. There'd be more exclusive platforms where people would go to find the communities, and alongside the communities, they will also be learning skills as well. So
Yeah.
it's basically skills plus the access to the community that I see as
And
a future.
yeah, I think that's powerful. Like also not given the platform, but like allowing and making sure that all of the people, like all communities, have the power to share their stories that they already own,
Yes.
right? That we
Yes.
many times don't see in many
Yeah.
platforms. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of online learning platforms that you would come across, you can go sign up on any platform, take a course, and you would never open that course after that first day. And we all have been there. We just start so many courses, but we never finish any course.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I think we want to tap with the career acceleration program that we do at Caterpillars. Is it's not just a course. You're a part of the community. You're a part of a 12 weeks program that does not only provide you the content, but it provides you much more than that stuff, which it
Yeah.
builds your confidence. It gives you resources. It holds your hand when you feel the life is getting tough and you're not able to like finish that course. It set goals for you. So there is much more to online learning than just
Mhm.
recording a course and putting it online, which I feel is the least interactive way to learn anything, sitting behind your screen and watching somebody else talk basically.
Yeah. And that links perfectly with our next question. This question comes from Pearl from Uganda. She's asking, how do you work towards making caterpillars more inclusive in relation to barriers of accessing technology, making it accessible regarding to cost, knowledge of use, among many others?
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it, Paul. Half of our job, basically, in terms of like access, COVID did it for us. I was worried about it as well when we started Caterpillars. Okay, so if I want to build something which would be 100% online, so we reach people from communities that any physical business won't reach. This is why I wanted to keep Caterpillars online or fully remote. So we reach those cities that nobody has ever been able to reach. And then, but with that, there was a question that how do we make sure that all of those people who live there would have an access to this, would have a smartphone, would have a laptop to use, or to surf our content, to go to Zoom, to talk to us. And COVID took care of it to some extent. During that time in 2020, that's when we did our first cohort of Entrepreneurship Accelerator, and the world was shifting towards Zoom itself. Like, I think nobody was pushing Zoom. It was just the last option available. So 5 years ago, if I go to somebody and say that I work remotely and I talk to my clients through Zoom, maybe I think 20-30% of them won't even understand what I'm saying, right? How is this possible? But when COVID happened, the problem of access kind of like got solved for us. People knew about Zoom. They knew there was no other way other than connecting to each other online, and that turned out in our favor. So we didn't have to worry about the access of getting the information there. But there's still a huge problem of, I mean, if somebody doesn't even have the laptop, no matter how much you talk about Zoom, it doesn't matter, right? So the access to providing them those resources that would connect them to programs like Caterpillars is still a very big weakness, I think, that Caterpillars has, because there's so much we can do. If we and then that's where this question I feel is very good and it's very interesting as well. When you talk about access to technology, any sort of like state has the responsibility that the entire country is pushing towards technology, has an access to the internet, or to the life on the internet, which I feel Pakistan is one of the fastest growing countries in terms of like smartphone penetration. But we still feel that there's so much more as a company we can do in terms of like giving them the tool. But when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to teaching them how to do it, when it comes to making our program in a very easy language, and when it comes to making our program easy to stream, or giving them the leeway that even if they're joining us from any smaller or remote part of Pakistan or anywhere in the world, uh, we're just more empathetic toward that the life over there, life here is not the same. So we internally build a lot of like empathetic policies on this, that people join us from all around the world, and the life here versus the life there is not same. So we have to build our programs, our policies, our material, our education resources all around the in a very empathetic tone to cater those people as well. I still don't know if I answered this question correctly, but I am aware of this problem, and I know that this is something that we are actively working on, and that I personally should feel one day we'll reach there where the access to technology would become like would be very normal for those places, and as a result, organizations like Caterpillars would have even wider access to reach those women who otherwise do not have an access to programs like us.
But I think it's really powerful how you do know, in terms of accessibility, what you can do right now with how in what stage Caterpillars is. But at the same time, it's really powerful to acknowledge the weaknesses that you still have, because
Hmm.
we will still have like social movements and NGOs, civil society organizations, social companies will always have weakness, right? But I think
Absolutely.
the important thing is to acknowledge that, to overcome that in the future. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, thank you for recognizing that. Um, and also, now moving to the next question, you were just talking about like the differences also between Pakistan or the US, for example.
Hmm.
And Mas from Poland is actually asking, you've mentioned realizing that the US struggle with similar issues that you've been working on in Pakistan as well. So she's asking, how did you communicate the usefulness of your expertise from back home in the American context?
Wow, that's a great question. I think so. When I went back from my fellowship to Pakistan, I was just going through a lot of emotions, and then a lot of I was feeling that the clock was ticking on me in some ways, and I think all of you would feel as well, because in some ways most of you have left your jobs, come to the United States for a year, and then working here, and then when there will be like 2 months left for your fellowship, you'll just start thinking, okay, so what's next? What am I gonna do now? Like, would anybody hire me if I go back to Pakistan or to your home country? Would anybody even care what I've done here? And that's these are the similar type of questions that I was going through as well. There were people who were landing jobs while they were in the US, like from our class.
Mm.
They had it all figured out. Okay, so I am landing in Pakistan in July, and I am starting from my new workplace in August. I was like, wow, these people have everything figured out what they want to do. And when I was thinking about what I want to do, I was basically kind of like answering the same question that Maz has asked. Like, how would I make sure that I communicate the expertise that I've gotten from this fellowship
Mm.
to any organization, and would they feel that I'm a good fit for the role or not? And I applied for a couple of organizations when I came back to Pakistan. Some of the organizations that I really wanted to work for as well, but nobody got back to me, which in return turned out in my favor because I started Caterpillars. But I always made sure that everywhere I go, I give credit to Atlas Corp, give credit to Miller Center, give credit
Mm.
to hundreds of other people who I've met in the United States while I was in my fellowship.
Yeah.
And when I started Caterpillars, that question kind of like answered itself, right? Because when it comes to like sharing the usefulness of my expertise in the context of the local organization that I wanted to set up, it kind of like translated into something. Okay, so I went there, I learned all of these things. I partnered with the host organization, the same host organization where I was working, and I brought them to Pakistan.
Yeah.
So if you think of it this way, I think the question kind of like answered itself. I was working with the same organization in Pakistan, but this time as a partner when I started Caterpillars. So it was tough to answer in terms of like if I wanted a job, how would I make sure that
Mm.
I'm heard, or people think of me as somebody who has a lot to offer because of this entire experience I got. But I don't think so. I was able to do that, um, and I don't know if it was fortunate or unfortunate, but it led me to start Caterpillars, and maybe some of you would feel the same and would go ahead and start your own companies.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's amazing. Like how, again, like how you recognize when you have the platform, or you don't have the platform to like raise your voice, but then that leads you to start this, right? So I think that's really great. And so we're running a little out of time. We're about to end this amazing session. So we have the last question from the audience. It comes from Alu from Nigeria. And it's asking, what do you do when you feel less motivated as a result of discouraging factors?
I think, although I wish I had an answer to this question, I think, and I've been very vocal about this one concept of motivation versus discipline throughout my, because I
Mm.
create content on social media as well. What has worked for me throughout my life is I've come to the point where I think the whole idea of motivation is BS. It's very temporary. It's very kind of like a, it's a failed concept. Nobody feels motivated to do a lot of things, especially when you know that the world is just so messed up these days. You just don't feel motivated to keep fighting the same battle every single day. But what works for me is I don't see my energy or the work that I do as a result of a motivation. I see it something as something more, much more bigger than that. Like, number one, greater good. Number two, it's a discipline that I've created in my life. It's the set of processes and systems that I've created in my life. So every single day when I feel like I am demotivated and I don't have the energy to deal with this right now, I still get up and do it, because that allows me to reflect on the problem in a much more wiser way than just sitting and crying that I wasn't able to like solve it. So I think the whole concept of motivation is in some way, in some ways, is like is not the right way to look at things. We should
Mm.
start looking at things from a more disciplined way. Like, it's the whole, and you can Google this whole theory of motivation versus discipline. Like, people feel demotivated all the time, but when they build discipline in their life, when they build systems, when they have a bigger impact or bigger vision, things become much more easier for them. Because motivation comes and goes, but the impact or the vision you have, it stays same for the rest of your life. So I
Yeah.
just go back to that vision every time I feel demotivated.
Thank you. Thank you so much again for joining us, and for also keep inspiring the community you were once part of. I mean, you're still part of your
I Yeah.
graduation program. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for inspiring us all to continue our social impact after this program. And for the audience, thank you so much for joining us for today for another leadership journey session of the Atlas for Global Leadership Lab. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, on YouTube for more engaging content like this. Also, I encourage you to visit our website, atlascorp.org programs, to learn about ongoing recruitment for Atlas Corp programs. My name is Michelle, and our guest today was Hira Saeed. the founder and CEO of CaterpillHERs. And thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you so much, everybody.